Here we go.
Okay. Okay, and just to clarify on your question about subjects and predicates, Brad, the subject is the main focus of the story, and the predicate is anything about the subject that comes after that. So, like, Brad is wearing a hat.
Oh,
Brad goes to the store.
okay, thanks.
And Mario could only get 3 out of 16 of those correct.
Okay.
And then my following observation that I wrote down kind of focuses along the same things. When verbally asked questions in class relative to the reading assignment that we're currently working on, Mario only answered correctly 1 to 2 out of 10 questions, depending on the day. Mostly it was about 1 out of 10. He's constantly talking with his neighbors, and he gets angry and loud when students tell him to be quiet. He's not always responsive to my requests and seems to forget our class rules very often. This day in January, I had asked him to go over the rules for working in groups, and he responded that he didn't remember. So I think it kind of speaks to that comprehension piece. I think he genuinely could not remember the rules. The next observation I did was in February, the beginning of February. I stated that he was still struggling with the class work. He stays off task during class and often makes loud jokes in place of active participation when asked to contribute to class instruction. I think it's that kind of deflecting because he's not really keeping up with what we're doing, so he would rather be the class clown than look like he doesn't know what we're doing. I spoke with him outside of class that day and asked him to think of ways to try to be more engaged in the reading. I asked him if he was excited. We had just started the Hunger Games, and he just kind of responded with shrugs and quick responses. Although when we got back in class and he was talking with his peers, he seemed excited about the text and about the adventurous content of the story, which is great to hear that he was excited about the story. But I think the reading level might be above his ability. He seems to be really struggling with keeping up with the book. And this was kind of shown on my next observation. We did a quiz for the reading comprehension, and he only got 3 out of 10 questions right for the reading comprehension. He gets frustrated with the class activities. He's like, when he gets frustrated, he threw down his pencil and he said loudly, "This sucks," and then he laughed loudly, which is pretty disruptive to the rest of the class. I spoke with him about his behavior, and he said he would try to be more focused, but he continued to whisper with his neighbors throughout the class. So I'm seeing very little improvement in the class, which we've talked about. My final observation before the IEP, getting prepared for the IEP, is that he continued to have behavioral outbursts and an inability to stay on task. And this really concerns me in the general education setting. He speaks to his neighbors very frequently. He yells at his classmates. He knocked books off his classmates' desks. I separated the two of them and just had I spoke with Mario alone, and he said that he was very angry because his classmate said that Kobe was better than LeBron. This had nothing to do with our class content, so obviously it was a side conversation. And everybody's entitled to their opinion. It's just how we handle ourselves when someone has a differing opinion. Yeah, and that's good that you guys have such strong opinions about it, but it's important to let him know that other kids are entitled to their own opinions. And just because they're wrong or different doesn't mean that he needs to get physically and verbally aggressive with them. So he does have some aggressive tendencies. We've all spoken about him before. We're aware of these. And his schoolwork is still a problem, which is what we're addressing in the IEP here today. The most recent quiz that he took was a vocabulary quiz, and he only scored 4 out of 16 on that for grade level vocabulary words. So I'm very concerned about his educational performance as well as his behavior.
I am as well, which is, the whole reason of why we got here together today and trying to figure out how we can help Mario be more successful in school, both in the classroom and how he's learning, but also how he interacts with his peers. So, Brad, Christina, I hope that Jenny and I have talked about some of these observations and what she's been seeing. We've had a lot of informal meetings about what's going on, talking about strategies, but we just wanted to be sure that both of you had a clear picture of what we're seeing in the classroom and what Mario's typical behavior is on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, this is what I see more frequently than not on the days that I work with them.
So, if we don't have any further questions about the observations, we're going to talk a little bit about Mario's eligibility. Each student who has an IEP does need to be eligible for the services that they receive through special education. All the accommodations and modifications, things that we change about his schooling that makes it appropriate for him. The school psychologist couldn't be here today, but she shared with me some of the eligibility information that we were going to look at today. Some of the first things that we were looking at as far as what qualifies Mario for having what we call a specific learning disability, that there are certain ways that Mario is having trouble intaking information. Some of these were done through the evaluation. We'll talk about what we see there. That we have a committee formed to talk about how we can help Mario learn. The observations, which we just looked at and have discussed. Underachievement documented, so we've seen that in his grades, any of his missing assignments, but also assignments that he is trying his best to work on, and seeing some of that underachievement. Severe discrepancy, which we'll discuss more when we look at the numbers that the school psychologist reported, as well as response to intervention we'll be discussing, and I'll talk about what that process looked like. We've ruled out lack of instruction. It's not just the instruction that he's receiving in Jenny's classroom, but as you know, Brad, he's had trouble in the 5th grade, and he had trouble in the 4th grade. And we've seen these things for a while, despite really, really great teachers that are with him. And so oftentimes we form an IEP after we've determined that they're getting the best instruction possible. We've ruled out any other disabilities as through the what we call Chapter 7 in Wyoming lays out all of the disabilities that we can choose from, and we'll talk more about that. Any other factors, and then after we got your consent. That all kind of leads us to be in this room today. Let's talk a little bit about RTI. This is called response to intervention. This is how we address all students within our school to be sure that they are receiving what they need, and that hopefully that we can stay proactive and help out a little bit more before we just enlist students for special education. 25% of our students at level 1 show that students engaged in the regular classroom with the teacher implementing differentiated instruction. So essentially, if one type of instruction or one type of teaching isn't working for the student, then we move on to something else. And that the teacher is trying out different things for the students that are having a hard time.
And for the different level of students, because a general education class is made up of a variety of levels. And Mario's just in one of the lower levels. And so we've differentiated the instruction to get the different levels of kids.
So with that, we retest these students, and thank you, Jenny, for that. But Mario still was scoring about 20% at the end of the level 1 intervention. So it's showing that it wasn't really changing anything in what he was learning or how he was learning. At level 2, we try to make sure that 25% of students pass on this. This is when we start bringing in a smaller group. So right now, Mario's in the general education classroom and generally with 15 to 20 other students. At level 2, once we see that those last strategies didn't work, we're going to start putting him in smaller groups so we can focus a little bit more on how Mario learns and how other students are learning.
And we have trained reading coaches to come and help with this part, which you recall because you were a part of this RTI process. We pulled you in at level 2 when we started needing to pull them out into the smaller groups. Do you remember the letters that got sent home? Okay.
So 3 times a week, at a minimum, for 60 minutes, we do some smaller instruction that's really focused on how he learns, and it's just a bit more intense than that last bit of instruction. But he's retested at the end of that 8 weeks, and he still was only scoring about 22% of questions correctly. So we determined that he needed to keep progressing through response to intervention RTI. At the level